Yo, what's up guys, Ghost here. Hope you guys are having a fantastic Christmas break. So, Battlefield 2042 has over the past year picked itself up off the ground and become a half-decent Battlefield game, at least judging by the free-to-play sessions that have been occurring this December. That seems to be the consensus, at least, among people who are coming back into the game. However, there are, of course, lots of things that still could be improved. So far, we've seen big changes to maps and weapons. Significant specialist changes are happening soon with the reintroduction of the class system, but there are still certain areas of the game that require significant iteration, and DICE's work is far from done. So in this video I want to touch on one of those areas and hopefully give DICE some much needed feedback on what to work on next: the vehicles. Before we begin though, please do consider subscribing if you enjoy the content. Thank you to everybody who has subscribed or become a member over the past few months. Your support really means a lot to me. Now, vehicles have seen the odd nerf here and there, and the number of vehicles per map has been addressed on a few occasions, but most of the glaring issues have yet to be resolved. And I mainly want to focus on the vehicle that has received the least amount of changes here in this video, and that is the jets. Alright, let's not beat about the bush here. The jets in Battlefield 2042 suck. Plain and simple. They just don't feel good to fly, and I think anyone, whether you're an experienced pilot from previous games or you've never touched a jet in your life, is able to feel that. They simply feel far too sluggish, floaty and heavy. If you want to strafe a ground target like a tank, you have to pull up very early to actually make it out of that strafe alive, or you risk crashing into the ground. So good luck in actually successfully strafing a tank or even hitting one with a couple of AGMs. They simply have that much weight to them, much more than in previous games. In Battlefield 4, you could risk pulling up at the very last second, and that actually resulted in pilots getting shot down by s'mores and RPGs and whatnot because they got so close to the ground. Dogfights are just a joke, honestly. If we look at the last game that had futuristic fighter jets, again, BF4, flying jets was an entire game in and of itself. Whole communities sprung up around the sport of dogfighting. There were online competitions in dogfighting, platoons dedicated to people who wanted to learn how to fly. For those of you who've been here for a really long time, you may even know that I pretty much built this channel by helping teach players how to fly the jets in Battlefield 4. All of that depth, that skill and mastery is just poof, up in smoke and gone in this game, and it's mostly the terrible physics of the jets that are to blame. So in my mind, the physics need a complete overhaul. I realise this is a big ask, but so far we've seen DICE implement the Battlefield 3 attack jets into Portal, and the physics of those jets feel much better. They're far from being perfect, but they're at least an improvement. Now secondly, having the Su-57 be inherently faster than the F-35, terrible idea. Jet dogfighting is built around outmaneuvering, and when one jet is inherently more agile than the other and both pilots have the same skill, it's a no-brainer who's going to win. And yeah, I know the F-35 has hover mode, but let's be real here guys, whilst hover mode might work to punish an amateur pilot in a dogfight, it's not going to work against anybody half decent, and what's more, it'll probably put you at a disadvantage. So as far as I'm concerned, hover mode is just a gimmick, same as it was in BF4. I would simply bring the F-35 speed and agility up to the same level as the Su-57. DICE kind of shot themselves in the foot here by making one jet a VTOL jet, so they can't really realistically add hover mode to the Su-57, but meh, what the hell, it's not great anyway, and that's how it worked in previous games, and that was just fine. So I think that's definitely an area DICE need to look at. The jets need to feel more responsive, snappy, and maneuverable. I mean, for crying out loud, DICE, they're cutting-edge fighter jets. Now that's not to say the other vehicles in the game are perfect, right? The helicopters also don't feel particularly great, but at least they have had some changes made to their flight models, most of them stealth changes that weren't in the patch notes at all, some for better, some for worse, but the helicopters are very effective. So I can't argue that whilst they're not as good as the Battlefield 4 helis, I do still find them effective and fun to use. Same goes for the tanks really. We also recently heard that DICE are planning to make some much needed changes to the turret turn speed of all the tanks, which would have definitely been my #1 change. So there's a lot more work to be done on them, but this is a really good first step. I would also like to see either some more air-to-ground weaponry for the jets or a new jet category, such as the attack jet. In Battlefield 3, these jets had rocket pods and were able to effectively strafe ground targets. In BF4, we had two different varieties of jets, the attack jet for taking out ground targets and the stealth jet, which is pretty much what we have in 2042 today, lock-on missiles only and guns. Without the addition of the attack jet though, or at least some sort of air-to-ground weapon for the fighter jets, flying in 2042 gets very boring very fast, as once you've taken out the enemy air targets, there really isn't a whole lot you can do, and I find myself simply abandoning my role in the fighter jet and ejecting to join the fight on the ground. Gone are the days where you could take a fighter jet helping out your team for the whole match, and who knows, perhaps that's what DICE want, but it certainly isn't the case with the helicopters. Now the last point I'll make here, and this applies to all vehicles, is on the spawn system. I've mentioned this in previous videos before, but I am a big believer that the Battlefield 4 spawn system was vastly superior to the one we've seen in previous games. In that system you had no vehicle categories and there was a separate spawn for each and every vehicle. This meant DICE could balance the vehicles around each and every map. Gunwood Railway, for example, was one of the larger maps that had every single vehicle available, and then you had more mid-sized maps like Flood Zone that had no jets, no attack helicopter, and now the king of the air was the scout helicopter instead. It kind of changed up the dynamic, or you had, an armor-only map like Propaganda with tanks only, all the way down to infantry-only maps such as Operation Locker. DICE are doing this to a certain extent, but they're balancing them by game mode rather than by map, as every single Conquest map has had all vehicles available. So using the system that Battlefield 2042 does really makes balancing the vehicles much harder and leads to frustration among players. That's precisely the reason why on launch we had something crazy like 4 Nightbirds available per team, because you could pick any transport vehicle you wanted, and hell yeah, you were going to pick the Nightbird over the Condor. The second thing we lose with 2042's vehicle spawn system is a use for the lesser vehicles. It presents you with the illusion of freedom. It supposedly gives you the choice of any vehicle you want. It sounds great, right? All vehicles are always available, you can choose whatever you like, but this actually means you're going to pick the best vehicle in any given category almost every time. Whichever vehicle is the best in its category is the one you will spend that token on, and the other vehicles get very little playtime. This was exactly the problem that we had with jets, in fact. They were bunched in with the attack helicopters, they're woefully underpowered in comparison, and understandably, hardly anybody picked them. Now they've been given their own spawn, and we see jets all the time, because whilst you might prefer a helicopter over a jet, if the jet is available to spawn in but the helicopter isn't, well, that's a much more enticing option now all of a sudden. I believe this sort of gameplay is also present in the specialist system. Again, you've got the absolute freedom to play any specialist with any gadget and any weapon combination you want. So what is the incentive to play anything other than Falk, Angel, McKay, Sundance, etc.? They're simply the best specialists in the game. The introduction of the class system will give some of the lesser played specialists a purpose again. Do you want to play an engineer to take down vehicles? Well, that's going to bar you from choosing those top tier specialists that will be available only as assault or support. And now all of a sudden you have a reason to pick Liz or Boris, for example. Now those are my opinions on the matter. Obviously your guys's may differ to my own, so it'd be interesting to read what you have to say down below. I do have another one of these videos planned covering another area of the game that is very lacking in my opinion, and that is squad management and community. So be on the lookout for that one. I'm thinking possibly this video does well about making this like a little mini series, and as we progress through the remainder of Battlefield 2042's lifespan, I think it's important to mention these areas that still require work, even if they never receive it. Whilst the game has been improved and I'm absolutely thrilled to see people coming back, giving it a go, and having fun with it, we still can't forget all the things that have been lost and absolutely must be improved, if not now in this game, then for the next game. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like on it, feel free to share this around, and hopefully somebody from DICE will see this and maybe think once or twice about actually changing some of this stuff. Have a great time, whatever you're doing today, guys, and I'll see you in the next video.